Hi, and welcome to my channel. Or if you're a returning subscriber, hi again. It's so nice to see you back here for another video. My name's Tesslark, and today we're making dragons. And we'll also be testing out some different chameleon powders. The materials for this project, my social media links, and any other link that you might want to find will be linked down in the description below. And let's hop into today's project. To start this project, I went ahead and I pre-mixed 50 milliliters of resin. These molds are really small, so it's really not going to take too much resin to fill them. And then to that, I'm going to add some charcoal gray mica powder by Arteza. The general rule of thumb whenever you're mixing pigments with resin is you want to keep it about 90% resin to 10% pigment. Any more than that and the resin may not cure correctly. So I'm just going to go ahead and mix my pigment into the resin, making sure that I'm scraping both the sides and the bottom of the container as I'm mixing. And I typically mix my resin for a couple minutes just to make sure that there's no little lumps or bumps of that mica powder in there. And a good way to check how translucent or opaque your resin is by looking at how the resin looks at the bottom of your popsicle stick. Now that my resin's fully mixed up, I'm just going to go ahead and hit that with my heat gun to pop any bubbles that are forming at the top of the resin. For this set, I'll be using a set of 4 different Chameleon Mica powders by Laza. And Chameleon powders just have 2 different tones to them, so they kind of shift the tone or the color depending on the light. And these ones don't have names, but these are the 4 different colors that I'm going to be using. And as always, I will have all the materials that I use for this project linked in the description below, so if you want to try it for yourself, all of that information will be down there for you. When I use mica powders in resin, I will mix the mica powder right into the resin, but I've seen several different resin artists paint or use a paintbrush to sort of paint the mica powder inside of their molds and then pour the resin. So I'm going to be trying that technique today. I do think that this could potentially save mica powder, so you're not having to use quite as much or waste any if you're mixing up too much and don't need all of it for your project. So I do like this technique and I'm hoping that the pigment transfers well. And I'm just taking my time here, making sure that I get a nice even layer on each part of this little mold. And just a quick reminder, if you are liking this video so far, don't forget to give it a like. Not only does it help my channel a whole lot, but it also lets me know that I'm making content that you guys want to see from me. And here I'm just using a little piece of duct tape to sort of clean up the outside edge of that mold. Next up, I'm going to go ahead and paint another one of my molds using this copper pinkish color, using the same technique here, and in between uses, I've just taken my brush onto a paper towel and cleaned out the pigment in between, but it doesn't seem like too much of the previous color is transferring into this one. So I'm just going to go ahead and get into all those little nooks and crannies. I really love how detailed these little molds are. And then moving right along to this purplish blue shade. And again, just the same technique here, painting it into the bodies of these dragons. My son is currently obsessed with dragons, so I really think that he's gonna love these little pieces. Which makes me curious about you guys. How many of you are parents? How many kids do you have? Do you want to have kids, or are they not for you? Let me know in the comments down below. And then the last of the colors that we'll be trying today is this sort of blue, green, and purple one. And just in the bottles, I think that this one's my favorite, but I'm really curious to see how they look once we pour in the black resin. And once I've got a good layer on all of these pieces, it's time to go ahead and pour in that black resin that we made earlier in this video. So I'm just going to carefully use my popsicle stick and drip a little bit of that resin into the thicker pieces of the dragon and sort of use the popsicle stick to push it through into the smaller places. I'm also using just like a small little stream of resin here off the tip of my popsicle stick to get into those little crevices. But instead of filling these molds up all the way, I'm gonna go ahead and use my heat gun to heat up that resin so it will get a little bit more liquid and easier to push into all of those little tiny areas. Another tip when you're working with resin is it does like to be on the warmer side, preferably around 70 degrees. So if you live in a colder climate, your resin may be a little bit more thick and a little bit harder to work with. Whereas if you use your heat gun or you submerge your resin into warm baths before you mix them together, you can warm up the resin and make it a little bit more liquid and a little bit easier to work with. So that's why I'm using my heat gun here here instead of filling up these pieces completely, because as you can see here, the resin is pretty thick and I don't want to overfill these molds. So I'm going to go ahead and fill it up the majority of the way, but then I will go ahead and use my heat gun once again to make that resin a little bit more thin and a little bit easier to work with, a little bit more runny, so that it gets into all those little nooks and crannies. And then moving right along, we'll finish our last two pieces. And this footage is sped up by 4, and it's also cut a lot, so you're not sitting here watching me fill these molds all day long. But when you're doing this process, make sure you're taking your time, because these molds are so little and you really don't want to overfill them. You want to just go ahead and work slowly. Okay, so I let these little molds set up overnight, and let's go ahead and pull them out and see how they turned out. This is the first one, and as you can probably see, I overfilled it a little bit, so I'm very curious to see what it looks like when I pop it out. Just for example, you can see how clean these lines are here and how kind of blobby it is there. But we're testing some pigments, and I'm making these for my kiddo, and I know he's gonna be excited either way, so let's see how they turned out. He's pretty cool. It definitely looks a lot more red, I think, on the screen than it does in person. I mean, it's definitely kind of like a rose gold color with some red and purple undertones to it. And you can see all of this extra resin in here, but I can go ahead and just sand that down later and it's not gonna be a big issue. Moving on to our next one. This is the one that is the kind of greenish gold. So we'll see how this one turned out. Oh, so cool. It's also nighttime here, so I'm wondering if the color isn't completely correct. So I will go ahead and take some shots of these in the natural light so you can see them as well. But this one turned out really cool. I love all the details in this little mold. It's crazy how many details there are for such a tiny little mold. And then moving right along to our more red colors. Nice, he's so purple. It's kind of like this purpley blue color. It's very, very pretty, but I definitely think that I need to get some shots of these for you guys tomorrow in the natural sunlight so you can really see the color a little bit better. I typically put my pigments in the resin and mix it that way and then pour, but I do think that this uses a whole lot less pigment and you definitely get a very nice even layer of color on there. And there's no transfer when I'm rubbing my fingers on there. None of that pigment is transferring off. So very, very cool. And here's the 4 dragons together. You can kind of see the difference in the colors a little bit better here. I think that they all turned out really cool, and you guys are gonna have to let me know which one's your favorite in the comments down below. Personally, I think my favorite is this kind of pinky red one, even if I over poured the resin a little bit. And that brings us to the end of this project. Thank you so much for checking out this video, and thank you for spending part of your day with me, especially if you made it all the way to the end. And if you did make it all the way to the end of this video, leave me some sort of dragon or wizard or mystical emoji down in the comments just so that I know that it's real. I really hope that this video inspires you to make something of your own today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye! I really hope that you guys